This is the second interview dealing with Harry and Orabelle Stage, given by Ruth Hawley on March 19th, 2012. She's the granddaughter of Harry and Orabelle Stage, and this is the second interview in this series. So, Ruth, in the first interview, you just were talking about how Harry Stage was not allowed to go to West Point because his grandparents,
That was Bruce.
Bruce Stage, his parents wouldn't let him go to West Point. They kept him home on the farm. Could you continue talking about that? You said he went to State College then?
He was, my grandfather and grandmother knew he was their meal ticket. And my grandfather couldn't wait for the time to come that he could retire and put Bruce at the wheel of running things. So there was a lapse in. He did let my brother let Bruce go to college at Wayne, and he got 1 year of college. Well, Bruce was a workhorse, and he was smart. He knew about the prices of everything, and he was a brilliant mathematician, and he had everything figured out. Well, he was denied going when he had got finished with his 1 year of college at Wayne. That was the end of the road for Brucey. They'd be getting any plums thrown his way. That was enough for my grandfather to decide to retire. And then the family, they moved to Wayne. And I think I forget, he had so much money that Bruce had accumulated. It was all his labors, really, that did and during the war years, and he knew the price of the crops. He knew when
During
to
World
sell.
War One.
Yeah, he had all the smarts as a young fellow, young person, that he was had a wonderful mind that he could figure out the right time of the year of the to sell the crops and what to buy and what was proper for the land. He had put his knowledge to use. Well, Grandpa moved to Wayne so he could retire, and Bruce got a job in the bank with the banker. And that was the banker that got him the appointment to West Point to get him out of this clutches of ignorant parents. Neither one of them seemed to know. They weren't bad people or anything, but they were only thinking about themselves and how they could work Bruce's labors to their own. So my grandfather, after 1 year of it, of living off of Bruce's wages at the bank and the crops, and the kid had to study, and he wasn't. Well, it fell apart. 1 year's time wasn't enough for Grandpa to retire on Bruce's labor.
So Bruce then went back out to the farm at Laurel.
Then they moved back on the farm.
And then when did he marry Frances?
Well, she was a neighbor girl that they grew up together when they lived at Pender. And she come from a big family similar to my grandparents' background. And she had taken teacher's training, and she was a very smart lady, and she was a nice person, and just exactly right for him. And she wrote to my grandparents that she had got a job. It was all played out. She'd gotten a job as a teacher at Laurel, and wanted to know if she could live there on their farm with them and be the teacher there at the country school there. Well, of course, they knew Brucey needed to be married. He was, I forget how old he was, but he was a full-fledged man by then. And he'd already told his father that he was going to work and share crops on shares like a renter. That he wasn't going to work another day he had even gotten himself lined up to go into Iowa with some source that he had that he'd had it working and being the slave to Grandpa, So Grandpa agreed that Bruce was to have the proper amount of money, and so Frances lived with my grandparents, and Bruce, of course, was there too in the house, and she taught school for a year. They didn't get married till after the year was over, but there was an agreement then that they would marry. That's how their romance blossomed.
Okay.
And Bruce got married, but then my grandparents came into Laurel, and Grandpa got to his heart's content. He was able to retire, and he hadn't done a lick of work in his life that was really what you could call. He had Bruce doing it all, and my mother was she was a spoiled darling.
Okay. Well, we're gonna come back. We're gonna talk more about Stella in a bit. When did your grandfather die?
Well, let's see. He lived to be in his 80s. I was married because I remember visiting him and my grandmother. So he died in about 1946, 48,
Okay.
and through there.
Okay.
He died of old age, normal. And they lived there in Laurel. They're across the street from that Lutheran church there, that
Mhm.
house that I bought from the estate.
Yeah.
And so I lived there when we left California.
And what about your grandmother?
Well, she lived on, and we were still living in California, but we were spending because she came out after my grandfather passed on. She came out and spent the winters in California. We lived there on North Oakland, and she'd come every winter for 2 or 3 winters. Well, then she died, and that was when my father had his upset in life, and he decided he wanted to move back to Nebraska. He was homesick. My father was. He wanted to get back with his own family there in Lincoln, and he'd made a lot of money selling lightning rods, so he could afford it.
Okay.
He had money.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about the Lynches and your dad
Okay.
in a separate
Well,
a separate interview. So, what kind of personality did Orabelle have?
Well, they were decent people, God-fearing people. There wasn't any child abuse, beatings, or any of that type of thing. Bruce, he was their means to an end, to a retirement, because using his strength in his years of labor. And then he finally, when he reached the age of maturity, he told his father, "You're going to share equal shares as a renter." And that way he stayed on because he got his own land and after that, and he bought I don't know how many different farms and things because he was smart, and there was the war, World War II.
World War II or World War One?
World War II, because I was at that age.
Okay.
I was on the scene.
Okay.
And but anyway, when they
Do
died,
you have any childhood memories of going and visiting your grandparents?
well, all I remembered, I don't remember either one of my grandparents, either when we'd walk out and go to the city park or what have you, or I don't remember them ever so much as buying me an ice cream cone. Nothing. They were very turned inward people, and nobody knew anything but them. And in reality, they were as ignorant as the day is long, because they could see no farther than the end of their nose. They weren't bad people. They went to church, and that was their life.
What was your mom's opinion of them?
Well, she was Harry's daughter, and she was the princess. She was never allowed to go out to the barns or anything like that. She had to stay where the house was at in the garden, to work out in the garden and something like that. But she was spoiled. However, you couldn't be badly spoiled because she never went anyplace. And she was in church one morning. That's where my father was up there selling lightning rods, and he went with a friend to church, and he saw each other across the room, and that he smiled and nodded to her, and she had a coy little dropping of the eyelids, and so at that time she'd gotten engaged to a local fellow who was an older man, and she had agreed to marry him. Well, when my father came on the scene, and he smiled and he was looking for a lady friend. She goes home that very night and she mails off a letter to the other fellow that she was not going to marry him. She broke off her engagement because there was just no way people could meet each other, and that's how it was done. And
Okay.
this guy, he was just an mediocre fellow, where my father was glamorous, coming from a city man and a salesman. Oh
Yeah.
my!
Okay. Well, we definitely are going to talk about that in our next interview when we talk about Stella Stage.
Okay.